Legion Lost, Run from Tomorrow, is one of the opening titles from the reboot that DC Comics put forward in late 2011. This volume collects Legion Lost issues 1 through 7 and is written by Fabian Nicieza and Tom DeFalco and drawn by Pete Woods. In my journey to decide which of the New 52 titles I will decide to keep reading and which ones I will drop after the first volume, I found out pretty early on that the Legion of Superheroes was, out of the first few books I sampled, my favorite of the New 52. So that made me more anxious to jump onto the other Legion title from the New 52, Legion Lost. For anyone who hasn't read this series, the basic premise is as follows. The Legion of Superheroes is a large team of superheroes from the 31st century. The team consists of people from many different planets with many different superpowers. Legion Lost, specifically, is about 7 members of the team who travel to the 21st century chasing a terrorist who wants to destroy humanity in the 21st century with a virus that transforms them into a wide variety of alien hybrids. Immediately, this book does some things right that I complained about in the Legion of Superheroes opening volume, and overall, it does some things that makes reading this book something of a chore. If you've seen my review of Legion of Superheroes Hostile World, you know that one of my major complaints with the first 4 issues of the book was how it tried to introduce too many characters all at once. Over 20 characters were introduced during the span of that book, and since the book was the same length as this book, it had a harder time making me care about any of the characters because they were all trying to share screen time with each other. Comparatively, I feel like Legion Lost does a much better job of keeping it simple and not overloading the fans and the audience with too much junk. There are only 7 members of the Legion in this book, and there are 7 issues, so it's much easier to get to know each of the characters a little bit. Almost every issue of this volume is narrated by a different member of the team, so we get a chance to get inside the head of each of the characters, for the most part. And I really do feel like I've come to know some of the members of the team by the end of the book, like Wildfire, Dawnstar, Timberwolf, and Tyrock. The bad thing about this volume that I mentioned earlier is something that is kind of widespread in fiction. Television shows like Gilligan's Island, Quantum Leap, and Lost all have in common one thing with this volume of Legion Lost. They are all about a person or a group of people who want to get back home. But when you have characters who are constantly complaining about not finding a way to get back home, it brings this problem to the forefront in a more noticeable way. And when the main thrust of the series is, will they get home, then you run the risk of alerting your audience of the limited nature of your series. Either they will never get home, and the audience will eventually stop caring because it is very annoying to hear these characters complain about how sucky the 21st century is, or they will get home, and when they do, the series is over, because the whole point was seeing them in a foreign place trying to get by. And that is the essential problem of this book. In the majority of the issues collected here, the Legionnaires are talking about how they need to find a way back home, or they are complaining about how primitive it is in this time period. I figured when the Martian Manhunter told them that they are stranded for good, they would figure out what their new purpose would be in the 21st century, and maybe the creators of this book would stop treating Legion Lost like, well, Lost, and maybe they'd treat it more like Lost in Space. But even after the Martian Manhunter tells them that they are permanently stranded, they are still complaining that they have no way to get home. Really, this all boils down to how I operate as an aspiring writer and as someone who enjoys thinking about writing. If I was told to write Legion Lost, I'd want to establish much earlier on that they are never coming back to the 31st century. Then maybe I'd want to explore how this affects each of the members of the team. Maybe some of them feel more comfortable in the 21st century, while some of the others, with good reason, wish they could go back home. Instead, this book spends too much time with the Legionnaires thinking they can get back home, and so those interesting character moments aren't really there. I did mention that each issue allows us to get inside the head of one of the members of the team, but even then, it's really just the audience seeing the events of the plot from the perspective of one of the team members. Even when we find out this team is stranded, we don't get to see, say, Dawnstar thinking to herself about how she'd rather be dead than live on this polluted, primitive prison or whatever. I'm spending a lot of time on this because it really is problematic in how it is handled. At least, it was a problem for me. Beyond the way the premise of the series is handled, there's the bad guy, Alastor. Alastor comes from the 31st century and had a younger sister who was killed by a xenophobic hate group on Earth. So he worked with a scientist who created this virus that would transform humans into different combinations of alien hybrids. At first, the Legion is trying to stop this virus from spreading, but they really have no way of doing that. And in fact, Timberwolf, one of the people on the team, is infected, and it gives him new powers he apparently did not have before. Near the end of the book, Tellus, the telepathic frog-looking guy on the team, he tells Alastor that his actions will lead to humanity being this magnificent beacon of hope across time and space. The virus will eliminate barriers like race, gender, and religion. Now, I'm not entirely sure how it will eliminate gender and religion, since those aspects are internal, and if I suddenly become a half-Durlan, that doesn't erase my Christianity or my Buddhism or whatever religion I practice. But this begs the question. If this virus really can't be undone, then shouldn't we be seeing its effects in other parts of the New 52? At first I was thinking, oh cool, this will be a neat way to create instant superhumans, sorta like how, back in the 1960s, Stan Lee created mutants so he wouldn't have to create an origin story every time he created a new character. Maybe this hybrid alien virus can be the root of a brand new supervillain that Superman fights in his own title, or Wonder Woman fights a new villain in her own title. But how far will this be taken? When the Legion members aren't complaining about being trapped in the past, they're usually complaining about the possibility of being infected by this virus. But out of all of them, we've only seen Timberwolf be infected for sure. So does this mean the virus will only affect a few people? Or 100 hours after the virus is released just isn't long enough for it to have much of a visible impact on the planet? I know that the Legion Lost title was canceled at issue 16, but I'm curious if I pick up, say, a Superman trade paperback in 2 years, will there be any references to the severe rise in metahuman activity? Or is this whole plotline going to be ignored entirely by other writers on other books in the New 52? With all of the meddling from the executive side of things since this relaunch began, I would be very surprised if the editorial didn't enforce some references of this plotline and even make sure that the writer in, say, Green Arrow does a storyline where Ollie Queen's secretary gets infected and becomes a Coluan or something. Overall, I actually enjoyed this book for the most part. I did feel like the way the creators handled the premise needed a lot of work, but I thought the characters were handled very well, and I would like to know more about this version of Tyrock and Wildfire and Dawnstar. I'd like to know more about how this virus and the failure of this team will have an effect on the past, and whether this means that if they could theoretically return to their time, would their time even still be there, or would it be an altered timeline thanks to their failure? But despite everything I loved and liked about this book, I will not be picking up Volume 2. After finishing this book, I was air quotes treated to the following blurb at the bottom of the page. Join us as we ramp up for The Culling, a major crossover event that stars the Legion Lost, Teen Titans, and Superboy. Okay, if there is one thing that will drive me away from these New 52 titles, it is the incessant crossovers. When a line of comics, especially one as huge and sprawling as the New 52, is relaunched or rebooted, I don't want to see a crossover half a year into the reboot. I adamantly feel like every title should be given plenty of time and room to grow and breathe. Let the creators show us how this reboot is different than what came before. Let them tell the stories they want to tell, and let them establish this world before we start throwing them into these crossovers like throwing an expensive television into a lake. After I saw the costume designs for the New 52 version of the Teen Titans, I knew I would never be reading that title. I actually did want to sample Superboy because I have liked that character in the past, but knowing that Legion Lost and Superboy will be crossing over with the Teen Titans makes me completely uninterested in following up Legion Lost Volume 2 or even bothering in picking up Superboy Volume 1. Yes, even though I liked this book, I cannot support it when it does something like crossing over with a title that I do not think deserves to exist. And knowing that Superboy will be crossing over with Teen Titans as well means I won't even waste my money on the first volume, even if it isn't part of the crossover. No need for me to get into a series if I know I won't be getting past Volume 1. So it's a shame. DC actually had me with this series. I enjoyed this more than a couple of the other New 52 titles I've sampled, but they had to go and ruin it by throwing this into a crossover. If anything, I guess I should be thanking somebody, either editorial or the writers, because I won't be wasting my money on 2 other trades that are part of this relaunch. Keeping that in mind, keep up the good work, DC. Please cross over everything so that I will instantly stop reading everything you produce. Please and thank you. Sarcasm aside, I hope this review was helpful for you, and if it was, please be sure to give this vid a like and subscribe to my channel for more videos of a similar nature.